We have a big show lined up for you today on this Monday to get your week started off right on Locked On Stars. Today, I'll be joined by host of the Starcastic Remarks podcast, another Dallas Stars hockey podcast. I'll be joined by Ryan Chambers, one of the hosts of that show, to talk all about the Dallas Stars woes over the weekend, talk a little bit about John Klingberg, and then talk about the Stars team as a whole and what they need to do in order to turn this season around and potentially make it to the playoffs. All of this coming up on a Monday edition of Locked On Stars.
Your Locked On Stars, your daily podcast on the Dallas Stars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Howdy, Stars fans. Welcome back to the Locked On Stars podcast, the only daily podcast covering the Dallas Stars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. I'm your host, Dane Lewis, and you are locked on the Dallas Stars on this Monday, January 17th. And like I said at the top of the show, it's a big one. In just a second, I'll be joined by Ryan Chambers of Starcastic Remarks. Had a follower on Twitter whose name is escaping me right now, suggesting that we do a crossover episode, and we made it happen here on this Monday for you. So I hope you guys enjoy that. But before we get into all that goodness, do want to take a moment and say thank you for stopping by today's episode of Locked On Stars. Whether this is your first time here or you are a recurring listener, thank you for making Locked On Stars your first listen of the day. Be sure to subscribe to and follow our show if you do not do so already. And of course, if you like what you hear, feel free to rate and review. If you don't rate and review, Victor E. Green will be under your bed tonight and will scare you where you can't sleep. And no one likes not sleeping. All of that is unconfirmed. That's up for you to decide whether or not what I just said is factual. But still, if you feel inclined to rate and review, please do so. But without any further hesitation, let's jump right into today's crossover episode between myself and Ryan Chambers of Starcastic Remarks. Welcome in, Stars fans. I'm used to saying, Stars fans and fill-in-the-blank team fans alike if I'm with another Locked On host. But today, I'm joined by someone who loves the Dallas Stars just as much as I do. Joined by Ryan Chambers of Starcastic Remarks, another podcast covering Dallas's favorite hockey team. Ryan, how are you today?
Doing good, man. I could be better because, it seems like every DFW team lost this weekend, including the Cowboys. But, we've seen better days for DFW sports, but hopefully that will change.
We have brighter days ahead, certainly. I'm still wearing my Cowboys polo that I put on so excitedly this morning. But left disappointed. But the Dallas Mavericks won Saturday, so that's a plus right there.
I guess that is a positive. Yeah, I guess 1 for 4 is not bad. 25%.
Yeah. We got to take them where we can get them for sure. Really excited to be doing this. Don't always necessarily get to cross over with other members of the Stars media that much, but very, very excited to be crossing over with another Stars podcast nonetheless. Here to talk about some of the games from the weekend, John Klingberg, and anything else that may come up. But starting with those games, Ryan, over the weekend. A pretty tough outing for the Stars in Florida, obviously missing some big pieces on the roster. But what were kind of your big takeaways from these games that they played against the Panthers on Friday and that game against the Lightning on Saturday?
I had two different reactions because with that game on Friday, it just made me feel like this Stars team is further away than what we thought they were. So I don't know how much you talk about on your show, but me and my brother Chris, we talk about this constantly, and the fact that this is like the last chance with this core for the Stars to get a Stanley Cup, appear in the Stanley Cup Finals again. I mean, this is the shot. This is it. I mean, when you got Radulov coming off, you got Pavelski coming off, obviously Klingberg coming off, and we'll talk about that later. But it just showed me how far behind this team is compared to the quote-unquote real Stanley Cup contenders. And, I felt better after Florida thrashed the Jackets on Saturday night, but it just made me realize that, this team is probably a little bit further away than I expected. And there was just a lack of effort and a lack of emotion in that game against Florida. And those were my biggest takeaways out of that game. And on Saturday, I just felt down and depressed because it just pushed it even further. And, I'll go into the whole Cowboys thing because, the Cowboys' biggest thing right now is they can't win in the playoffs, right? I think it's 11 appearances in the playoffs, and they haven't, some sort of stat like that. They're not able to win at home in the playoffs or something like that. And it seems like with the Stars that even when they are able to play well, they find a way to lose. I mean, they dominated for 40, 45 minutes of that game. The first period was absolutely a great response. Second period was not as good, but they were able to, diminish the, the damage on that. And, Dobby definitely had a really good game. And then in that third period, it just seemed like just turnover after turnover after turnover. And then like when they had their opportunities in that third period, it was about middle of the way through the third period. I felt good. I felt great. It was like 9.5 minutes, 9 minutes left in the third period. I'm like, okay, we've got the momentum. We've got it. I mean, we were getting offensive pressure going down into the other zone, and you could just feel a goal was coming. And I was right, but it was the other way. It was one stupid turnover, one penalty if you're the Cowboys that screw everything up. And it just seems like over the past couple of years, this team has relied on defense too much, and there's no offense whatsoever with this team. And it's frustrating to see this not just game after game, but year after year after year. And it's been not just with Bones. I know a lot of people are saying things about Bonus, and I may or may not agree with that, but it was with, it was with Monty before that, Jim Montgomery, and then it was even with Ken Hitchcock before that. So it's just a matter of the identity of this team. And my biggest takeaway from that game is that this identity of this team has to change. And this whole, defensive structure, it doesn't seem to be working. And I don't know. That I know that's a lot to process over those two games, but that's just how I felt coming out of each of those games. It was very different thoughts, but both negative.
Yeah, I think, I'm on the same page as you in regards to how both those games went. And I think that's kind of what a lot of Stars fans and people who have watched this team for a long time are feeling is the identity of this team for too long has been, centered around defense, which defense isn't a bad thing to focus on. But I think that there's just been too little offense over the years, and especially on the road. I mean, you have to bring your A game. And we know that this team does have some good offensive capabilities based on the way they play at home. But and I say all the time on this show, and I'm sure many other people have thought it because it's a theme throughout the world of sports that good teams win at home, but great teams, find ways to win on the road. They can win anywhere. And so even, the Stars team is, dancing around that middle of the pack spot in the wild card race right now. And I think that they have the talent to make it to maybe even that bottom wild card spot on their best days. But I mean, even if they do get there, what are the odds that they, win a 7-game playoff series against anyone in this Western Conference? I mean, you look at the rest of this division, the Pacific Division has, 2 or 3 really good teams, and Vegas, Anaheim, and even the Kings now starting to pick things up. So it's just, yeah, like you said, frustrating to see, the Stars struggle so much offensively, given some of the talent that they have in Rupe Hintz and Jason Robertson, and even Joe Pavelski at the ripe age of 37. Those guys kind of doing all they can, but I mean, you can only ride 3 guys for so long, and have the other 9 forwards, not showing up to play every night. It's hard to build the team whenever you kind of structure yourself that way, like you said.
Man, there's so many points that I could hit there, but I'll go back to that defensive structure, and it's almost, and I don't want to say that it's like a fire bonus thing. I know everyone's talking about that, and that may or may not be the problem. But the problem is, I don't know if that's really going to change anything. Like everybody, and it's funny that I feel like this way. And this team is 5-2 in their last 7 games. But the problem is that they can't win on the road. And I think that's probably the biggest, nail on the head right now. They're 4-11-2 away from home. They're 500, I mean, NHL 500, if they're like 6-6-2 or 7-7-2 or whatever, this team is top 3 in the Central Division. But because they can't seem to figure out a way to get offense or do anything the way they do it at home, it's just frustrating to watch, because we see how much potential this team has, and they're just not living up to the potential. And I don't know what the answer is. And that's the more frustrating thing.
Today's episode is brought to you by Built Bar. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, or maybe even better than a candy bar. Built Bar makes it easier to stick to your New Year's resolution because it tastes so good, you'll want to eat it. Unlike other protein bars, which can be chalky, waxy, or taste like a chemical spill. if you want to eat healthy, but you think it just gets so boring because by week 3 of your resolution, or where we're at now, kind of halfway through January, you're thinking, oh, this isn't worth it. I need my chocolate. Where is the chocolate in my life that I've been avoiding because of my New Year's resolution? Well, Built Bar is here to save the day because they are made of 100% real chocolate. Even if you're not a huge fan of working out, you can at least eat something that's good for you and that tastes good. That way, when you enjoy a delicious Built Bar, you can almost count it as a workout, because Built Bar not only has real chocolate, has a ton of other really good ingredients that are good for you, like protein, not a whole lot of fat, not a whole lot of carbs, ultimately a good experience all around. You can go to built.com right now and use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. Again, use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off your order at built.com. Yeah, it's so weird. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I know those 4 road wins. One of those is overtime against New York. One of them is a shootout against Pittsburgh. I know they beat Calgary and then Arizona, which
That's the only regulation win they have. The only one. It was a it was after the second night of a back-to-back.
I was in the middle of that win streak. I think they played Colorado the night before at home, which, I mean, you should be beating the Arizona Coyotes this season if you play them. But yeah, those other 3 wins, I mean, we've seen that they can even get it done on the road. Even early on in the season when they were kind of struggling, Calgary, Pittsburgh, and in New York especially, all 3 really good teams this season. And so, yeah, just frustrating to see. And even just on the whole bonus standpoint, I mean, it's kind of night and day. I feel like whenever you see the outcry on social media during that 7-game win streak, I feel like the fire bonus crowd was pretty quiet. And then
not a word.
we've dropped these 2 in Florida, and people calling for his job. And I agree. I'm starting to veer towards wanting him gone at the end of the season. It would take something drastic, I think, for him to be gone in the middle of this season. But it wouldn't surprise me to see him not come back. Yeah, he would have to like do something illegal, basically. Which honestly, some might argue the way that this offense is being run is a crime within itself. But I'm starting to understand the more I see it. And I think the other thing that a lot of people have pointed out on social media, and I agree with, is maybe just the lack of ownership on his end. I don't know if you heard the comment he made before the Tampa Bay game, that if the roster was not hit with a bunch of COVID absences, that there'd be a lot of guys sitting out with the healthy scratch. And that just confuses me, because I don't see how that would help the team going into that matchup with Tampa Bay. And he said some of the names would have surprised us. So I'm imagining maybe some of the bigger name forwards on the team, and you take those guys out of the equation, and we're not going to hang with Tampa Bay at all. So just kind of confusing on my end to see that response from him, and kind of pushing all of the accountability on his players, which the players do need to be held accountable as well. It's a split. But I just feel like I've seen very little to none accountability from Bonus and the coaching staff throughout kind of this whole season, pretty much.
Now, the one thing that I will mention, you mentioned the forwards, but one of my biggest takeaways, because I actually did my podcast by myself on Friday, was the play of John Klingberg. This is a guy who's, he's arguing he's worth over $8 million. He's looking for 8.5. And, he's looking for a 8-year extension on top of that. But the way that he played in that game was absolutely terrible. And I would bet my life savings, and I put this on Twitter, I would bet my life savings that one of the players that Bonus was talking about in that particular comment was John Klingberg. Because you could see the very next game, he was on the 3rd pairing.
Yep.
So, and then if you look at the time on ice that he had compared to the other top 3, in the even in the Friday game, the first game, Florida game, I mean, it was like the top 3 had 20 plus, I think it was like 22, 23 plus minutes. And then John Klingberg had 18. And that is frightening to see, because John Klingberg has been one of our best defensemen for a good portion of half a decade. And it just 3 of the first 4 goals were completely his fault. He was out of position or a really bad turnover. And it's just frustrating to watch him and know that he's not happy with the situation he's in right now. And the thing it's bad for the Stars either way, because right now he's not only is he playing bad, but any teams that are looking at him, that might diminish their short-term returns if they go out and trade him in the next week and a half or something like that. They may be like, oh well, he's only worth such and such instead of insert player's name here, because of the way he's been playing this past year. And it's just frustrating to watch. And it's neither way, it's good for the Stars.
Yeah, it's a tough situation for sure. And I mean, I feel like that just has to be part of it. Is I feel like, he's out there on the ice every night thinking that he's kind of 1 foot in the door, 1 foot out. because I'm seeing more and more on Twitter, especially since these games in Florida, that it almost seems like a matter of when, not if, that he's going to get, moved before the trade deadline. And yeah, it's just so sad to see because, as you mentioned, I mean, he's at his best, one of the best defensemen that this franchise has ever seen, if not the best. I think Miro Heiskanen certainly has an opportunity to eventually kind of take that title, but we just haven't seen enough years of him just yet. But yeah, I mean, just so sad to see kind of this drop off. And I think he's still at an age where he can play at a high level, but certainly not playing like he's worth that 8-year deal that he wants. And yeah, like you said, a bad situation if he stays in terms of the way he's playing, but also bad if the Stars are looking to get any kind of return that's going to benefit them either this season or in the long run. And so it's a very, very tricky situation. And we kind of, I think this is a good segue
Yeah,
into
yeah.
all this John
Didn't
Klingberg
mean
talk
to do
for
that, but
sure.
hey, look at us.
Yeah. Look at us figuring things out. The chemistry is already top tier. This is some Dallas Stars top line chemistry right here being displayed. But who are some guys that maybe you think that you could potentially get sent to the Stars, or some teams that you think the Stars might kind of look to deal with if John Klingberg does end up getting moved?
It's kind of hard to say because especially with the way COVID has kind of screwed everything up. More than half the teams are up against the cap. So the teams that are looking at John Klingberg are obviously the ones that are looking to make a deep playoff push. So
Mm,
the Carolinas of the world, the Florida, Toronto, or maybe even pushing for a playoff spot because they know they don't have much time. I'm specifically talking about maybe Pittsburgh or Boston. They've got older guys who can still play, but that window is closing very soon. I mean, Patrice Bergeron is 36 himself, but um, if I'm looking at a specific team, a couple of teams I'm really interested in looking at is Boston, Carolina, and Florida. And mostly the reason because of those three teams is because one, with Boston, they have Jake DeBrusk, who we know has requested a trade out of that, and he's played okay ever since that trade request has happened, but it's obviously not working there in Boston for him. And he's a guy that could potentially be a top 6, option for this team. Because for me, if I'm Jim Neal, if I'm giving up one of my better defensive puck moving guys, I'm looking for offense in return. Because especially if you're thinking, okay, this team is going to make the playoffs, and I'm going to make sure they make the playoffs, that's what you have to be searching for. Because you could go two ways with this, but that's the way, if I'm Jim Neal, that I would want. I would want to make the playoffs because this is my last chance. So that's why maybe Boston could be a potential, maybe like Jake DeBrusk and like a first round pick or a second round pick or something like that. The trade market is so weird right now. But with Carolina, there's a couple of players there, but I'm mostly looking at Natchez. He's a good guy that I think would probably fit with the Stars pretty well. And again, he's a 15 to 25 goal potential guy. He's done pretty well in Carolina, and that's someone that we could get back, and he could be put into a top 6, middle 6 role right now, and we could push for the playoffs then. And then with Florida, they've just got so many guys who, they have so much offensive potential. They scored in the 2 games this weekend on Friday and Saturday between us and the Columbus Blue Jackets. They scored 16 goals. 16 goals in 2 games is insane. And if I'm Dave Talon, the Florida GM, I'm looking at my team and I'm like, you know what? Maybe I could get some, defensive, on, I don't know, some more defensive play, and making sure that I can probably give up some of my offense in order to get a player like John Klingberg. I don't know who they would be willing to part with. I don't know, Carter Verhaeghe, John, Anthony Duclair, maybe somebody like that. I'm not sure, but those are just a couple of teams that I would have in mind as to good trade partners for the Dallas Stars. But again, it just with the cap, everything makes it so much more hard to make a deal. So I guess we'll see.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, I was thinking a lot of the same teams. I know Carolina, even since the beginning murmurings of this trade, have kind of been one of the teams in contention for sure. So I think, it's very realistic he ends up there. Maybe even Boston, like you said, who's one of those teams this season out east that's having a good season, but is kind of looking to take that next step to be up there in the conversation with Florida and Tampa as far as title contention. But yeah, Florida's an interesting one too, because I almost feel like if you're in that situation with the Panthers, what they have, I wonder if you kind of almost take the approach of like, if there's nothing wrong, like don't make the
Yeah.
adjustment, you know?
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, and it certainly seems like nothing is broke with that team just based on the way they played this weekend. Because I thought the Stars had it rough Friday, which they did, but I would argue that Columbus had it tougher, giving up more goals. I think they scored one more goal than the Stars did. I think they did have two, but I mean, it made me feel a little bit better, and I certainly think that we'll be seeing Florida playing pretty deep into the postseason, if not being the last team standing. Just an incredible team that they built down there, and the Stars know that good and well, having played them 8 times last year, and now been in some pretty, offensive heavy games with them this year.
Mhm.
Thankfully, one of them ending in the benefit of the Stars, but the other one not so much. Today's episode is also brought to you by BetOnline.ag. BetOnline would like to wish you a happy new betting year as we continue our march to the playoffs and beyond. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the sports wagering action for 2022. It's a new year and with a new updated desktop and mobile website where you can sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code LOCKEDON to get started. From football, basketball, hockey, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for 2022. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet all of your favorite sports. BetOnline.ag, where the game starts. Yeah, really, really interesting to see all this John Klingberg talk. And I think just with me, it also comes down to for the Stars of what you value as far as moving forward. And, I understand he wants to get his money and he's done a lot of really great things for this organization. But I think if you're Jim Nill in the front office, I mean, you just kind of have to look at some other guys that are due for contracts in the coming years with Jason Robertson. I think, where does his deal? Yeah, next season. Or I guess this offseason, he's going to be a restricted free agent, but he's going to be looking for big money. Rupe Hintz is going to be looking for big money. And so I just think there's so many guys that you have to look into keeping that you probably value more for the Stars, which I think is a good thing because we're talking about the lack of offense, and Hintz and Robertson seem to kind of be the future offensively for this Stars team. And I think it's wise to sign them. You've already signed Miro Heiskanen into that big deal, so you have your supposed defensive star of the future there, and then you just kind of have to build either through the draft or trading and things like that. So kind of a hazy future for the Stars ahead. This season and even beyond.
Well, and I think the question I get more than anything is not necessarily even who do we trade for, but what are you looking for in a John Klingberg trade? And you hit right on it, because you could go one of two directions. Because the one direction is, okay, this team is good enough to make the playoffs. I'm going to get a player who can play right now, and then maybe throw a draft pick in on top of that, and get a guy that can partake now and push for the playoffs now, and then go that direction. Or the other direction is, this team's not good enough to make the playoffs. We just need to quote unquote start or rebuild now. I wouldn't call it a rebuild completely, because we have a good young core set already. You talk about Robertson, Hintz, Heiskanen, Ottinger. You could probably even maybe possibly throw Gary Onoff in there. I'd love to see Peterson be a part of that too. But we've got a good young core of players who are coming up. So it's not like this is going to be like a total teardown like the Detroit Red Wings and just be miserable for 2 or 3 seasons. But that's the other way you could go, is you just ask for prospects and picks. And if we see that out of the John Klingberg trade, that is a hint to Stars fans from Jim Nill that he doesn't think this team is good enough to make the playoffs. So I'm kind of dreading the John Klingberg trade for those 2 reasons. One, because he's going to be gone, and we know for sure he's going to be gone, which will be really sad. And then the other one, it's just a sign of things to come, of what he thinks, and that we'll be sellers at the trade deadline, which would really suck for Stars fans. And let me say this real quick too, because a lot of people are kind of frustrated with the fact that John Klingberg is asking for the money that he is and the term that he is. And in all reality, I don't have any problem with him asking for that term and that money. I mean, he absolutely deserves that opportunity to do that. I mean, when he signed his 7-year deal, it was like $4.5 million or $4.25 million or something like that. I forget what the contract was, but it aged very well for the Stars. And now he's looking to bank, because he knows this is probably his last chance to get it. And he's done so many things for the Dallas Stars. He's shown that he can play well. He's done everything they've ever asked him to do and more, and he deserves to do that. But it's just unfortunate with the circumstances that we are in now. With COVID, the cap has not gone up. If the cap had gone up, this wouldn't be an issue. And obviously the emergence of Miro Heiskanen, which we expected, but also the sort of kind of unexpected emergence of Jason Robertson has kind of pushed that John Klingberg contract negotiations to the side because the Stars just can't afford it. And he's looking to the future and saying, I'm sorry, John, but I've got other players that I've got to pay because, and right now those guys are younger. They're going to be around longer. I'm sorry, but they deserve more. And so, that's just how I feel about that. Am I wrong in feeling like that? What do you think about that?
No, I wholeheartedly agree. I think, I was looking the other day, because I feel like John Klingberg is kind of a topic of discussion on my show as well pretty often now, the past several weeks, especially. Yeah, I think he had 21 points back in the bubble run in Edmonton whenever they went all the way to the Stanley Cup. He's been a pretty consistent playoff performer for the Stars throughout the years. And yeah, I wholeheartedly agree that he's not out of line for asking for a big contract, given, the time and effort and energy he's given to this organization. And I don't think, and of course, I'm not Jim Nill and I'm not in that Stars front office, so I can't say exactly how they feel, but I can't imagine that it's easy for this front office to look at what John Klingberg has done and say, hey, we're not going to pay you this money. And, you hear it in sports all the time that it's a business at the end of the day. And this would, if he does move on and he does leave, it's just an unfortunate timing, like you said, almost, but it's hard to say it's unfortunate because Jason Robertson is a great talent. Miro Heiskanen, another great talent. Rupe Hintz, if he's going to get a big deal, a guy that we definitely want to look to keep. And it's just, you got to weigh your options. And so, yeah, I don't think out of line. It's not out of line for him to ask for this money. And, if he does end up leaving, I hope he's able to go somewhere where he can get paid and still be able to play at a high level, just because, like you said, he's done everything right with this organization, not really been in much trouble that I can recall, always doing what's asked of him, always playing very hard. And of course, a key member, helping the Stars get 2 wins away from a second Stanley Cup.
Well, and the other thing with that is you have to look at also the contracts that have been signed by defensemen. In the past year alone, I don't know if you watch the Hockey Guy on YouTube, but he's one of my favorite go-to guys that I watch all the time. And he did this video about these insane contracts that these young defensemen have signed lately. Cale Makar has signed his extension, and his wasn't even the biggest. You got like Seth Jones, who signed that enormous. I still think that was a stupid deal by Chicago, but I won't get into that. But his deal, and then you've also got Darnell Nurse, and then you've got Charlie McAvoy, who signed $9+ million, and he's only asking for that. And so it really is unfortunate that that all of that is happening. And while you were talking about that, I actually thought about one other team that I've actually kind of read about, especially today, is the Los Angeles Kings. That might be a good trade partner for the Stars as well, because they've got a little bit of cap room, and they're on the up and rise, because right now I think they're third in the Pacific, if I remember correctly.
Yes,
so
I think so.
They're looking to make some damage in the playoffs as well and push for the playoffs. And they've got some young guys for, if you're the Stars and you're looking to retool everything, that's where you go. And they've got some really good young prospects and a ton of them on all fronts of their depth chart, on the forwards, defensemen, and their goaltenders. So you could pretty much pick and choose whoever you want out of that, and they may give it to you. I don't know, but that might be another trade partner for the Stars.
Yeah, absolutely. The Kings, kind of an anomaly this season. That shutout loss to them back in early December doesn't look as bad now. Still, obviously not going to get shut out, but they've seemed to have turned a leaf since the start of 2022, and yes, now are competitive. And I believe last I checked, third in that Pacific Division. So it's yeah, all up in the air, and all speculation at this point. It's hard to know what every single person in this whole story ordeal is thinking, but it's going to be interesting to watch unfold, and going to be interesting to see how soon Klingberg gets dealt, if he does, because like you said, it kind of is a sign from Nil in the front office that they don't think this team is a playoff contender, which right now I still think that they have a chance. And even as tough as our road play has been, I think this upcoming week provides a really unique opportunity, because I think they play at home on Tuesday against the worst team in the league in Montreal. Certainly need to pick up 2 points there, and they need to do it dominantly. There needs to be no questions asked in that win. The top line, if assuming Robertson is back from his lower body injury, needs to have an all-time performance. And then they go, I think it's 4 on the road, and I know Buffalo's in there, Philadelphia, Detroit, and the fourth team is escaping me at the moment. But it's teams that are middle of the pack or but kind of below average, and two of those teams in Detroit and Philadelphia, the Stars have beat this season, and so I think there's an opportunity there to maybe kind of reestablish yourself on the road by picking up some wins or at least getting a point in some of those games against maybe what some might call inferior competition.
And you're right. You're exactly right. I mean, this is the perfect time for them to change their road woes. I entitled our last two episodes "Road Rage" just because it was just that bad. I had so much rage, and they just cannot figure it out. So this is a chance for them to kind of pad their stats a little bit, because I mean, looking at those teams, they have to be better than those teams. And the only thing I'm afraid of is that Detroit team is starting to look really good. And I mean, when you've got three possible, Calder Rookie of the Year finalists just in your team alone with Moritz Seider, Lucas Raymond, and I don't know how he is, but their goaltender, I forget, Nedeljkovic. Nedeljkovic is up for it
Yes.
too. And but I mean, when you've got three guys who do that, that's an up and coming. They're still a competitive every single night. So, and I've been watching them quite a bit lately, but that's not going to be an easy game. And then, Buffalo's Buffalo. They're doing okay. Philadelphia is not doing too great. And then I think New Jersey is the team you were forgetting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which,
And
they're kind of in that middle of the pack as well, if I remember correctly.
right. Yeah. They're like mid below average ish, but they're still competitive. And I mean, we've seen in the beginning of the season all these frustrating losses to especially these lower teams. Like the one that
Ottawa.
bugs me the most are those two Ottawa games, and then the
Yes.
Vancouver game, because that was before Vancouver was relevant and before they went on their insane 10-game win streak or whatever it is. I mean, we lost to them 6-3. We gave them 6 goals, and that was like their one win in like 7 or 8 games. And then Ottawa, there's no reason why we should be losing to Ottawa. And I'm
And
just
especially the way
afraid.
we did.
Right, exactly. No, you were 100% right. And I'm just afraid that at the end of the season, we're going to look back on, maybe this upcoming road trip and say, those are games we should have won, or, same thing with Ottawa. If we just win those games, we're in the playoffs. I mean, we could point to a number of things with this team, and hopefully that's not the way we look at it at the end of the season, but it's starting to look more and more morbid as we go on through the season. I'm hoping it's not the case.
Yeah, I feel like kind of the theme of the Stars really ever since the end of that 2020 Stanley Cup has just kind of been like a what if, because even last season, a lot of overtime losses and we're still kind of in the playoff hunt up until that last game. And, you look back and you say, well, what if they end up, win some of these shootouts or some of these OT games? And so many games this season that, they should have won, whether it's Ottawa, Vancouver. But you even look at the first time they played Vegas at home and they had that lead going down the stretch and Vegas ties the game and comes back and ends up winning. You drop a point there, you drop a point on the road to Winnipeg in a shootout. Nashville comes and plays at home and you lose a close game there. Just so many games that, the Stars found ways to be competitive in, but just ultimately kind of fell short. And I feel like that's just what we've seen so far. And I don't know if that's maybe a lack of experience from some of our young guys and kind of this weird disconnect between the young guys still finding their footing and some of the older guys like Radulov and I don't know. I mean, old doesn't feel like the right word for Ben and Sagan, but they're just not who they were.
They're
Neither of
not
those guys.
producing.
Yeah,
I mean, Sagan's 29. Sagan's
yeah,
only 29. He's not old.
yeah,
I mean,
it's
you
so
got.
tough.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Bergeron, who's 36, who he's part of that quote perfection line, and he's still producing.
Yeah,
I mean,
Pavelski's 37.
right? I know, yeah, that's within the same team.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to point out Alexander Ovechkin. That dude is a monster. But I mean, you could look at other players who are like these guys, and it's why aren't these guys producing? We don't even need them to produce like they did when they were in their mid-20s and Ben was winning the Art Ross and stuff like that. We don't need that. We just need secondary scoring. And then it goes all the way back to the whole Rick Bonus thing. Is it because of the situation they're in? They're being asked to do these things, and that's why it's stifling the offense. And I just don't know the answer.
Yeah, and with Tyler, I feel like all season I've tried to be easier on him because I know he's coming off season surgery, and with hockey, injuries are always so vague. Like I don't know what Robertson's injury was. It just said lower body injury, and we know Klingberg had an injury in that first game against New York. And I mean, who knows how much these things affect these kind of guys and how much pain they're playing through? Because I feel like you don't really know till you get to the end of the season. I don't remember really ever hearing about Sagan's injuries in the Stanley Cup run. I mean, he obviously wasn't producing quite like some other guys on the team. But then, you get after that series and you hear about all the things that were wrong with them. And so you wonder how much that plays a factor too. That's one of the things I don't like about hockey is how vague some of the injury things are, just in terms of knowing how healthy guys truly are when they're out there on the ice. Because these are tough guys and they'll play through a lot of stuff. But it can affect their play. And then, people criticize these players. And so certainly would love to see more from Jamie and Tyler, especially just because they've been staples of this team for so long. And it's frustrating too with these recent games. So I think they finally found a good place to be with Dennis Gurianov on that second line. But then
And then he gets
Gurianov goes
thrown
into
in
COVID
COVID protocol.
protocol. And
Dadgummit.
so, yeah, that's just perfect timing. But now it seems like just about the entire roster has done their time in COVID protocol. So hopefully by Tuesday, we'll get to see most everyone back. I don't know where Andrew Sekera will sit. I know he kind of tested positive right before that Florida game. But again,
Mhm.
I don't know how much of a difference maker he is compared to a Joel Hanley or Thomas Harley. But hopefully, once we get all these guys back together, they get maybe a refresh game at home against Montreal. They go on the road and maybe they can win 2 or 3 of those games. You maybe find yourself right back in that wild card picture. And I know as frustrating as the road performance has been for the Stars, I always say that the playoffs are different than the regular season in any sport, but especially hockey. And I think if the Stars team can make the playoffs, the veteran leadership on this team ends up paying some dividends, with a lot of guys that have seen the postseason several times before and been Sagan, Pavelski, and even guys like Glendening and Raffle, who have been around this league for a while. I've really liked what I've seen from them this season as far as just kind of the veteran edge that they bring.
Yeah. And if I had to think of 2 words just to finish the season that I would want to see the Stars do, and it is 2 C words: consistency and confidence. If they can do those 2 things, just those 2, I mean, there's obviously lots of things involved in those 2 words, but if they can do those 2 things, this team is a playoff team and this is a Stanley Cup contender team. But because of of issues with those 2 things, this is a bubble playoff team, and it's frustrating to see because like I've already said, we've seen their potential.
Yeah, and it's just going to be one of those things that we're going to have to see how this season plays out. It's been a roller coaster of a season so far, and we've seen what this team can do at their best when they were on that 7-game win streak because they beat some pretty notable teams on that streak. But we've also seen, the bad side of things too, and so it's just kind of Jekyll and Hyde with this team. But going to be, really exciting if they can get this thing turned around and make a playoff run, especially given the obstacles of this season with COVID and also just playing in what is one of the best Central divisions we've ever seen. And St. Louis, Minnesota, Colorado, and even Nashville, who I at the beginning of the season, I think I predicted them at like 7th in the division, and I had Chicago somewhere sitting at the 6-5 spot. And the script has been flipped there, and Nashville's had one of their best seasons, and so going to be really interesting to see how it plays out for sure.
Yeah, that Central Division this year is just abnormal, and it doesn't matter how well the Stars do if the teams around them are doing just as well, they can't catch them. So, and it goes back again to those games that we lost, And I mean, there have been some insane stats for these teams. Like, I know Minnesota hasn't been as good lately, but part of that was probably because they lost Kaprizov for a point of time. But I mean, like at one point, in their last 10, Nashville was 8-1-2, and in that same span of 10 games, St. Louis was like 9-1 or something like that. Some insane stat where like, and I mean, obviously the emergence of not Chicago, Colorado at the beginning of the season, they weren't all that great. They were, middling 500 team, kind of like us. And then they just tore off and took off. And now they're, one of the best teams in the league, like everybody expected them to be. So, and all these teams are right now above us. And, I don't want to be on the outside looking up and saying, what could have we had done differently? We're not even halfway through the season yet, and we're already naming these reasons: consistency, confidence, losing games that we shouldn't to teams, road woes, just not able to take care of business on the road, even just getting it to 500. And I just don't want any to be thinking about any of those reasons going in, and in April or whenever the season ends, because who knows when the season will end.
Yeah, very, very true. And and also a whole other, wild card of the rest of the season is that the Stars have 5 or 6 games that they missed because of COVID sitting in their back pocket, all divisional games, and those, could end up playing a huge factor. I know Winnipeg's in there, Chicago, I think a couple against Colorado, and then a Nashville game too. So going to be, a big mountain to climb, certainly a lot of adversity, but this Stars franchise and this Stars team is no stranger to adversity in the past several seasons.
Yep. Whether it be COVID, whether it be injuries, or whether it just be themselves.
Yeah,
So we'll see.
when there's a will, there's a way. But we just got to see if this Stars team has the will. But that's going to do it for today's crossover episode between Locked on Stars and Starcastic Remarks. Ryan, if you want to take a moment, if there's people that haven't checked out your show yet, if you just want to let the people know where they can find you on social media, where they can find your show, all that good stuff.
All right. So, kind of like how I mentioned, I mentioned myself, but I also do my podcast with my other two brothers as well, and that's Chris and James. But like you can kind of see if you're watching on YouTube, my Twitter handle for the podcast is at Starcastic R, or you can just follow me. Like my personal account is Starsboy12. I made it a long time ago, so don't make too much fun of me. But it is what it is. But and then also we do episodes after every single Stars game, and most of them are reaction episodes, and we talk just anything Stars. Sometimes whatever we want. We've talked about corn chips. No joke. We had an argument about corn chips, and I think that was like a couple weeks ago. So and I didn't care, but Chris and James wanted to talk about it, so we did. But it is what it is, and we're wherever you can find podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, Amazon, whatever. We're everywhere. So
that's awesome. Yeah, if you're a Locked on Stars listener and you're looking for some extra Stars content, be sure to go check out Starcastic Remarks. Ryan and his brothers, they do great work over there. And if you're a Starcastic Remarks listener and you want more content as well, you can find Locked on Stars wherever you get podcasts at. We're also on YouTube. This episode that you're listening to now can be found on YouTube, where you can see our faces. And you can also find us just on Twitter at Locked on Stars and my personal account at Dane_Lewis. But Ryan, thanks so much for reaching out and getting the ball rolling on getting this set up. And I'm glad we got to do this. And maybe we'll cross paths again in the future.
Yes, definitely, and hopefully we'll be a little bit more excited than the games that we saw this weekend. Whether it be well, I guess we won't talk about the Cowboys for a long time now, but hopefully the Stars and Mavs and the Rangers, and if the MLB even gets started up, hopefully we'll be looking forward to those things and seeing the DFW teams do well.
Yeah, the DFW sports can really only go up from here. That's the positive from this weekend.
No joke.
Certainly hope you guys enjoyed today's crossover episode between myself and Ryan over at Starcastic Remarks. Be sure to go check them out if you need more Stars content in your life. They do great work over there at that show. Really, really cool to always collaborate with other people that cover the Dallas Stars, to know I'm not alone, one, in covering this team, but also a lot of times in my frustrations and even the good things that we talk about with this Dallas Stars team, which is a little bit hard to bring up right now, but just always nice to talk and collaborate with guys like that. But thank you guys again for making Locked on Stars your first listen of the day. Now go make your second listen of the day, the Locked on Bets podcast with your boy Q, and of course expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling as well. NFL playoffs going on right now. You might want to throw some bets down on that. Those guys are the guys to help you out with that. Be sure to also follow and subscribe to the Locked on Stars podcast wherever you get your podcast at, whether that's on YouTube or your favorite podcasting platform. The show is always 100% free, and you can, of course, always rate and review the show if you like what you hear for free as well. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for a preview of tomorrow's game between the Dallas Stars and the Montreal Canadiens, a game that will be played at the AAC before the Stars take off and play their next 4 on the road. All of those games kind of coming in the Midwest or East Coast region. Going to be a very, very interesting week for the Dallas Stars and a very telling week. We're going to learn about this team over the next 7 days or so. But thank you guys again for listening. We will see you back here tomorrow. Have a good one, Stars fans.